As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So the U.S. and some of its allies released a joint statement on Wednesday threatening Yemen's Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah, over their attacks on Israeli-linked shipping in the Red Sea, which started in response to the brutal Israeli assault on Gaza. So this statement reads, quote, "Let our message now be clear. We call for the immediate end of these illegal attacks and release of unlawfully detained vessels and crews. The Houthis will bear the responsibility of the consequences should they continue to threaten lives, the global economy, and free flow of commerce in the region's critical waterways," end quote. So this statement was issued by the US, the UK, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Japan, Germany, Italy, Denmark, Canada, Belgium, Australia, and Bahrain. And Bahrain is the only Arab nation, the only regional country to sign on to this. And Bahrain's not on the Red Sea, but, the only country in the region there. So the Times of London previously reported that the US and the UK were working on a joint statement that would threaten action against the Houthis if they didn't stop the Red Sea attacks. And the way that report portrayed it was that it would be kind of the Houthis' last chance before they really hit them hard. And sources told the paper that options being considered by the US and the UK were direct airstrikes on Yemen or using special operations forces to target Houthi boats. The US has already sank a few Houthi boats, killing 10 of their naval personnel, and that was in an incident on Sunday. So things are really heating up, and the Houthis are continuing attacks on the commercial shipping linked to Israel. Doesn't seem like they're going to back down. The idea of cleansing Gaza of its Palestinian population is slowly becoming an official Israeli government position, and this was reported by Zeman Israel, which is the Hebrew sister site of the Times of Israel. And a senior Israeli official said that Israel is already in discussions with Congo, the African nation, and other countries on absorbing Palestinian refugees. The official said, quote, "Congo will be willing to take in migrants and we're in talks with others," end quote. Israeli officials are framing this plan as voluntary resettlement, but the Israeli military is making Gaza uninhabitable. Besides the massive bombing campaign, that's destroyed nearly 70% of the homes in Gaza, which is just a huge number. But the siege has also, they're also starving the Palestinians. Disease is spreading. They're doing everything they can to make their lives as miserable as possible. The report came a day after the U.S. condemned rhetoric from Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are two ministers in the Israeli government with lots of power, considered extremists in Israeli politics, but they're part of the government and their views are popular when it comes to this issue. Within the Israeli government, the U.S. is kind of pretending like it's just these two guys that are crazy. But Netanyahu has said he's working on finding countries to absorb Palestinians. He said that just last week. And on Tuesday, Israel's intelligence minister, Gila Gamliel, told Zeman that, quote, "Voluntary migration is the best and most realistic program for the day after the fighting ends," end quote. So that's Israel's intelligence minister, and she's in the Likud party. Her House bill calls for the U.S. to free Julian Assange. So this is some goodish news here. So I kind of missed this. There was a resolution introduced in the House last month that calls for the U.S. to drop the charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who faces up to 175 years in prison if extradited to the U.S. and convicted for journalism that exposed American war crimes. So I actually did see this bill like a week or two ago, but I thought because it was the end of the year that it would be a dead bill come 2024, but it's not a new Congress this year, so this bill is still active, which is really good. So this bill was introduced by Representative Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona, and it expresses, quote, "the sense of the House of Representatives that regular journalistic activities, including the obtainment and publication of information, are protected under the First Amendment and that the federal government should drop all charges against and attempts to extradite Julian Assange," end quote. So it's basically a declaration, it expresses that this is what the House of Representatives believe. So it's, it wouldn't force Biden to do something, but I think it could be a big deal if it does get passed. Now, so far, you have Gosar who introduced it and 8 co-sponsors. It's mostly Republicans, which is interesting. I'll read the list of co-sponsors at the end here. But Assange, he's been held in Belmarsh prison in London since 2019. So it's going to be 5 years come this spring that he's been in Belmarsh. But in February, on the 20th and the 21st, he has a hearing scheduled at the UK High Court to appeal his extradition, and his legal team and his wife say it's probably his last chance. It's his final appeal to avoid getting extradited to the US and put on trial. So ahead of the hearing, WikiLeaks and Assange supporters are urging Americans to contact their House representatives and urge them to support Gosar's resolution. So I think we should all call our representative, and I have the link there where you could find your representative if you're not sure. It's very easy. You could just Google it and put in your zip code. You could easily find your House rep. There's also the House or Capitol switchboard operator number, and tell them to support the bill. It's called HRES 934. Tell them to support this bill to protect the First Amendment and press freedom in this country because, like this bill says, what Assange did was standard journalistic practice. He obtained information from a source and he published it. And it was for the public good, and that's what they want to lock him up for. So it would set a very, very dangerous precedent.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Well, you know, in trend forecasting, you look at things for the way they are, not the way you want them to be.
Correct.
And again, you know, I'm a political atheist. I don't believe in politics. I mean, what are you kidding me? You know, what am I 6 years old? And you call it government schools, and that's what they are. And that's
Boy, they hate that, by the way. I have said that in the local high school here. And boy, did the teachers come up to me. That's a public school. It's not a government school.
Yeah, it's a government
and
school.
I said, Madam, who pays your salary? Who signs your paycheck? The government. Well,
the money that it costs me for school taxes all my life. You too. I don't have any kids.
Same here.
To me, it should be the more kids you have, the more you should pay in school tax.
Of course.
What the hell am I paying for your kids for? You pay for your own.
I don't even think we should have a public school system.
Well, I don't either.
I think the private schools would pop up on every street corner. You want to be a automobile mechanic, you go to this school.
Yep.
You want to go to Yale, you go to that school. You want to be a baseball player, you go to that school. It will cost a heck of a lot less. You'd have the choice you want, and you wouldn't be paying to turn a pig's ear into a silk purse.
Yep. Pig's ear into the silk purse. You got it. And again, it was that piece of crap may rot in hell who gave us World War I.
Yes.
Gave us the bankster bandits to take over the country, the Federal Reserve. He gave us federal income tax.
Yes.
And he gave us public school system, Woodrow Wilson.
Correct. That's when it started, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse. Now, I don't know what it's like in New York, but in New Jersey, in the classes on health, the government school teachers are required to tell 7-year-olds that they can change their gender. I mean, this is just, you can't even say this with a straight face. It's so revolting. Yeah. So we've gone from worship of Lincoln to, you don't have to live with your body. We can change it for you. The government will pay for it. And by the way, you don't even have to tell your parents. Just tell us. That's what we've gone to in the public, I slipped, in the government schools.
Yep. You go, starting with its very inaccurate name, the war fought on American soil between Americans from 1861 to 1865 was not a civil war. A civil war is a violent contest for control of a central government. The war between the states was not fought for control of the federal government. It was fought, like all wars, over power and wealth.
Because the federal government had seized the ports from Baltimore to Houston and began collecting tariffs, ports that were owned by the state governments and in which they had been collecting tariffs. That's what triggered the whole thing. It's no mistake that this started in the port of Charleston, because that was the hotbed where the locals kicked the feds out and wouldn't let them collect the tariffs. The southern states wanted wealth that the North had seized from them. The North wanted wealth that it had seized. So all it was about. It was also about, power. It was about the ability of a state that voluntarily joined the Union to voluntarily leave. An argument that Thomas Jefferson, the guy that wrote the Declaration, and James Madison, the guy that wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, both argued in favor of.
Now, and I wish you would explain this. In war, power means control of someone else's land, and wealth means seizing someone else's assets. The initial verbal and military salvos in the war were over whether the states, covetous of tariffs, revenues seized by the feds, could voluntarily leave the Union and resume conflicting tariffs. Hardly a novel concept at the time, but in government school, you probably never heard of this.
You probably never heard of the fact that it was not novel to suggest that the states could leave the Union. When the Union was formed, the 13 colonies became 13 states of the United States of America. 5 of them said, if you don't add a Bill of Rights, we're out of here. And the other states agreed, we're going to add a Bill of Rights because we don't want them to leave. Wait a minute. I thought they couldn't leave. Of course they could leave. Joining was just a piece of legislation, and a piece of legislation can be undone if it doesn't work out, if it turns out that it's harming the life, liberty, and property of the people represented by those who enacted the legislation. Lincoln argued that when the states joined the Union, a miracle happened, and they were wedded to the other states and to the Union forever. That's absurd. There is no miracle that happened. They joined voluntarily, they can leave voluntarily.
Yeah.
Of course, that would be nearly impossible today after all the blood that was shed in the war between the states.
You know, he wrote in the upcoming, the Treasury Journal just went out yesterday. And you know, my line, when all else fails, they take you to war.
Right.
And you look at Netanyahu's poll ratings, you know what they are?
I bet they're pretty low.
15%.
Wow.
15% support. They want him to leave after the war's over. And Biden's down to 39%.
Wow.
So again, these wars are going to ramp up. And the other war is what's happening over there in Ukraine. As we kept saying, they're going to get back in the news, and Ukraine is going to do everything they can to keep getting more support to fight Russia. They're losing. They're not going to win. No way, no how. They're going to do something, a false flag event or some kind of an attack. And Scott Ritter, of course, you know, this cat knows about what's going on really very well. And I understand that he's over in Moscow right now.
He is. And I was privileged to interview him yesterday with a regional Russian official who's also a financial guy and a developer of downtown areas and construction projects. We had a translator, and I said, Alexander, what do the Russian people think of Joe Biden? And as soon as it was translated, I saw a smile from ear to ear. And he said, Judge, in Moscow, we say, thank you, Joe Biden, because the sanctions have A, made us economically independent, and B, made us economically more prosperous, and C, we now know we don't need the West. I said, what do the Russian people think of the West? He said, we think very little of your government, but we love your people. We are warm and friendly to your people, and we want to engage in commercial activity with your people.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, of course, we've seen a lot of censorship and suppression of dissident voices, but now some of the people who really should be the thought leaders, people who haven't been catastrophically wrong on things, like you, for example, are suddenly rising to the top. And so the internet is not all just frustration over I'm getting shadow banned or whatever. It still is a liberating advancement for mankind, because it does mean that the people who are presented to us as our thought leaders, like Bill Kristol for years was presented to conservatives as a thought leader, but now he is mercilessly mocked and ridiculed in ways he couldn't have been before because there was no forum in which to do it. So there are some things that encourage me. And by the way, I don't want to obsess over this Nicholas Sandmann thing, but you know what, Dave? Maybe I do, because that whole thing about, you could say he was wrong, and there were other people who call themselves conservatives who got that wrong. The reason that's revealing, it's not that I'm saying everybody has to be absolutely perfect. It's what kind of instincts do you have? Mm-hmm. It's that the left does not do that. The left would not rush to throw somebody under the bus to appease conservatives and say, hey, wait a minute, I want you to know we're not like that, and make sure to understand that I'm a respectable person. That thought never crosses their mind, never. And so maybe that might have something to do with the fact that they're kicking our asses, and we're sitting back and taking the boot on the neck.
Or that we're playing a losing game where the game is rigged against you. If only one side has to grovel to the other side, like which side do you think is going to win? And the thing with that case, what was so interesting about that is that once the details actually came out, those kids could not have handled the situation better.
No,
I mean, like these were teenagers who were getting verbally abused and called racial slurs and did not retaliate, did not call racial slurs back. He sat there and just kind of smiled, kind of trying to diffuse the situation. All the adults involved were like horrific, from the black Israelites who were just shouting racial slurs at everybody to the Native American guy who's getting in his face and playing the drum in his face, like totally provocative and just immature and just wrong. But the thing is that what you had this group of kids who were Catholic kids who came to attend a pro-life rally, and one of them was wearing a Make America Great Again hat. And so immediately they were cast as, you must be the evil ones. But like, okay, you can understand why the leftists might want to view things that way, but why would anyone on the right want to view things that way? That's your thing. Everything about them is like your thing. So it was just unbelievable that you could, this could even happen. And I don't know. I believe the numbers were never disclosed because I think they settled, before it went to trial. But I know that kid probably got a huge amount of money and good.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
twice.
CNN had to pay him, and I think maybe the Washington Post was the other one. I can't remember, but it was definitely CNN. But he hit some of the big guys pretty hard, so that was good.
And what was also funny about the response to your interview with Tucker was how many people refused to mention your name. Tucker was interviewed by a comedian, and of course Ben Shapiro can't deign to mention your name, and so a lot of us were thinking, just like out of Breaking Bad, say my name.
Well, the thing with Ben Shapiro was, right, so they played the clip, and then and he said he was interviewed by a comedian who evidently is a libertarian or something like that. And look, I could understand if he was playing a clip from like Rogan, and he was like, well, Rogan's latest guest, or something like that. I kind of go, okay, I mean, maybe he doesn't know who I am, and it is Rogan's show, but this was my show. He sought out a clip on my show, and it wasn't the clip that was going viral. It was like a longer clip. Like, he went in there and got what one of his people did. I have a pretty easy name to remember. Like, I don't know, you must have seen my name all over it, but whatever. Anyway, the one with the Blaze doing it was pretty funny. It was just like, I've been on Glenn Beck's show twice. And I actually, someone from the Blaze did reach out to me. I mean, I was all saying it kind of tongue in cheek. Like, I was like, say my name, Blaze, or whatever. But one of the people who works there did reach out to me and go, sorry, that was like the person who runs our Twitter, like, blah, blah, blah. So, but I was like actually upset about that. But the whole thing is just kind of interesting. To your point before, like, it's not just me. I mean, there's, as much as there are problems with tech censorship, obviously, and there have been really great voices who were suppressed, particularly during the height of COVID, which was really terrible. But look, on net, it's such an advantage. I mean, we just have, look, even someone like, like Joe Rogan, who maybe doesn't have the theory down pat that we would all like him to have, because he just kind of runs off instincts, but he's just been so much better over the last few years than just about, with very few people. You know what I mean? Like in the corporate press, have anything even close to as good of a track record as he had? He was totally skeptical, from lockdowns to the vaccine mandates to the war in Ukraine, now to this war in Israel, or I should say the war in Gaza. And him and Tucker Carlson, back in the days, Tom, you got fired from your Fox News gig. Well, that's it. You're gone. You're like removed from the national conversation. And now Tucker's bigger than he ever was. And so I'm fine if people don't want to mention my name or whatever. It's like, I'm just happy that the clip is getting out there, because I do think it's like I almost think it's going to be very tough to ever put this toothpaste back in the tube. It's not like people who listen to the Joe Rogan Experience, even if they were able to cancel him or silence him, they're not going back to CNN. They're already levels past that. So I do think it's an exciting time that we're kind of all participating in.
Yeah, I mean, it is a white pill, because I think a lot of people very understandably feel discouraged because of the state of society. There are a lot of things to be discouraged about. But I think the dissident voices are starting to crack through.
This is Kyle Anzalone, and we caught it on Hedge, we caught it on antiwar.com, but it's a fascinating article, and it's written based on a new AP NORC poll. If we go to that next clip, the title, of course, is an increasing number of Americans see foreign policy as a top issue. And from the article, it says the Associated Press survey found that about 4 in 10 U.S. adults named foreign policy topics in an open-ended question that asked people to share up to 5 issues for the government to work on for the next year. Last year, only 18% of Americans said foreign wars were a top issue. And that's a big deal, because you're looking at a doubling of Americans who now have foreign policy on their radar. Now, does that mean that all of a sudden a massive tide has come over to the non-interventionist perspective? No, but what it means is Americans are now paying attention. They've seen $100 billion flushed down the toilet called Ukraine war. They've seen inflation go through the roof because of the printing of dollars to give to these wars. They've seen the threat of World War III as we go to Russia's doorstep and give the weapons to Ukraine and say, here, fire them into Russia. This is a great idea. And now we're seeing in the Middle East a horrific war, which is flattening an entire population, and all of the weapons are coming from the United States. And so that's what I think that we're seeing, and I think that's why they are waking up and awakening. And Lenin was evil, but he was also brilliant. And one of the things he said is the worse, the better. And as much as I hate to think of it this way, Biden has been so bad on foreign policy. His foreign policy has been so horrible. He's been enmeshed in wars the entire time he's been president. He's been sleepwalking as the neocons grab the controls, the hardcore neocons, the Victoria Newlands, the Brett McGurks, and all these guys grab the reins and are running this show and running us into the ground. And they're doing such a bad job that it almost fulfills what Lenin said. The worse he does, the better it is for us because it's an opening for us to make the case for non-interventionism. So there is a silver lining in this, I think.
Well, I think that's what happens when terrible things here happen here at home. And you say, well, if they do that policy, say it's immigration policies or domestic welfare problems at home and all the demonstrations, and then they don't really seriously ask the question, well, why do we do it? Why do we get involved in these foreign adventurism? And why do we do the domestic policy? And very close to what you just said is that a proper position from the Marxists is that for us to install what we believe should be proper government, and some of them actually believe it, that anything related to individuals, making their own minds about how to run their lives, they're against. And the best way is to cause chaos in our streets. And if you look at it, there's so many things that happen. Why would they do this? It's so stupid. But then again, you alluded to the fact, well, maybe there's a strategy.
I think for us, and I know you've been doing it a long time, I think that's the frustration that we have because there is this great opportunity and for us to explain it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to spend all of these trillions of dollars to enrich the military industrial complex and to enrich the careers of the neocons.
Yeah.
There is an alternative. It's called non-intervention, but it's difficult. You still run up against the Albright mentality. We are the indispensable nation. We see further than other nations. Therefore, we must get involved in everything. Where the retort would be, well, the proof is in the pudding. Where have we gotten involved where things have turned out better than they were when we started? Libya, Iraq, Iran in '53. I mean, where is it better? So maybe there's an alternative. I just wish, myself personally, I were better able to explain it to people.
But what will come and is around all the time, because if you talk the way we talk, what they do, they throw the word out. You guys are just way off base because you're a bunch of isolationists, and that's what causes wars. You got to be engaged in the world. Yeah. But the truth is, the isolationism comes from what we're doing because we become more isolated with all the wealth and prosperity we had, and they can reserve currency of the world, and yet we're still losing that. And the one thing that we, in a free society, that you don't lose, you don't become isolationist. Well, you really open up your doors to ideas and travel and people going back and forth and trade. There was a movement 10, 20 years ago. It seemed like you couldn't get very many economists. Rarely could you get one saying, we need more trade barriers, we need tariffs and all that. But now, look, they use that a lot. So, but in the free market, you don't have isolationism. You have isolationism when you do bad things in foreign affairs and the world isolates us from them.
Yeah, and our relationship with China is a perfect example. Engage is a good word. When we are engaged commercially, it prevents war. You don't want to go to war with your customers. But when we're engaged militarily, it promotes war, which is what we've been doing in the South China Sea. Right. So yes, we're all for engagement. It's just a different kind of engagement.
In the presidential races, I came up with a slogan out of thin air because I believed it, and the crowds loved it. And I said, it's not complicated. Freedom is popular. Yeah. And we could add, peace is popular, because when you have your freedom, you're more likely to have some peace. But yes, and how do you influence people when you don't have the government to tell us what to do? You do it through voluntarism. You try to influence people. And right now, we're not doing a very good job. I mean, just this whole thing, how we, assassinate leaders of other countries, and that is not a good example.
Not at all.